Joining the show today is Mike Huesmann, who comes to us. He's working with me over at Football Sapient. He is a college football fanatic, and I mean fanatic in every sense of the word. This guy is like even more hip on the transfer portal than I am. He knows about all the coaches. I think he probably knows everybody that's involved in college football in some fashion or form. So
that might be a little generous, but I try to stay plugged in.
You're very plugged in. Like college football is your world, and so I guess that's a good place to start with is what brought up the interest. I think we might have talked about this on the Thor episode, but go ahead and refresh me.
Yeah, I think we talked about the portal, on the whole, and at the time, I think what was happening was more in line with how people saw the portal and the vision people thought it should be. So guys leaving schools they weren't going to start at to go to schools where they would start at. Basically, the precursor and a streamline to the NFL where they were doing what was best for them to get exposure. But the Jordan Addison situation now doesn't fall into that box. People are viewing it, rightly or wrongly, as a guy who was already successful, who's leaving somewhere because he's going to make more money. So I think a lot of people are viewing the transfer portal and NILs as the same thing. They're not the same thing, but they are tied together as well. And it would be foolish of us to forget either of those. Without the open market and NILs, a guy like Jordan Addison doesn't leave this time of year. It's unlikely that happens. And I think that's fair. Most of us are in line saying it wasn't right that these universities and TV networks were making billions off of these guys' images. But I don't know if anybody wanted the extreme of what the Addison case is going at either, where you're basically locked in somewhere and saying, I'm going to go somewhere where they're going to give me more money. If that's what's happening. It's certainly what the detractors are saying is happening. I'm hesitant to put labels and put words in his mouth at this time because I don't know if it's fair to him and we don't know his situation, if he has a family to take care of. Even if he doesn't, who are we to tell a grown person how much money they can make and what job they can and can't have?
And that's kind of the thing too is, just from a situation standpoint, think about where Pitt is right now.
Yeah.
Kenny Pickett was just first round pick to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Love or hate that pick. It just happened. Your star quarterback, He's been there forever. He's gone. You've got Caden Slovis coming in, right, from USC transfer portal.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talent that left. There's a lot of talent.
And you also got a lot of statistics and won awards in a system. And your offensive coordinator left to go to Nebraska. Yep. And your wide receiver left to go to Texas to be with the Longhorns. You can't fault either of those guys for leaving. But if you're Addison and, my thought in the immediate time is any way you look at it, I'm going to be playing in a new system. Do I want to stay and do that here in this situation? Or do I want to go and do it in this situation where I can make a lot more money for myself? And it's an understandable if he wants to go make more money doing that. If all things are the same, you're going to be in a new offense one way or another. Why not maximize, that talent and your earning power? That's not to say that your situation in Pitt is going to be terrible. They did bring in a new receivers coach. I don't know if you remember him, Taekwon Underwood, former NFL player, went to Rutgers, was coaching at Rutgers. He's the new receivers coach at Pitt. So he had played at Rutgers for Schiano, was with the Dolphins, coached with the Dolphins, was at Rutgers the last few years coaching, is now going to pitch as the receivers coach. So, yeah, you're getting a guy with NFL experience, but what they have there doesn't really match up with Lincoln Riley and his staff. Or, we don't know. I happen to think it's probably a done deal. He's going to USC. I don't think that changes. There's too much out there. But say he goes to Texas or Alabama, well, you can't fault him. When you're comparing those programs to Pitt, there's clear winners in those situations for NFL talent they've produced in recent years.
Absolutely. And that's right too, because like the whole situation with Lincoln Riley, that was kind of blown up too when that happened, leaving Oklahoma. There was all the LSU thought they had him in the bag, which was hilarious. And then USC pulls out this crazy deal. He gets the multi-million-dollar house. He's got a private jet. It's all paid for by USC, and he's making $12 million a year, or something like that.
Yeah.
So
success
is pretty much expected at this point, right? So watching the spring game for USC this year, I noticed that they were talking about how they had, I want to say it was like 35 or 20, somewhere between 25 and 35 scholarship spots open at USC.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that you would go out and you'd be like, hey, this is one of the top wide receivers in the country. Think about what we could have. We already have, Malik Williams, who came over from Oklahoma with Caleb. And then we've got, I know there's another receiver on that team. I can't think of who he is right now.
Are you saying a guy who came over in the portal, or are you talking about one who was already there?
I'm going to have to look at I think I was writing him up on my draft document. That's why I was thinking about him.
Because
Bynum, Terrell Bynum.
Okay, Bynum, because Mario
from Washington. Yeah, you got him too.
Yeah,
and then Jordan Addison would just be the perfect pair. There's your three wide receiver set. You go your 11 personnel. You're in really good shape. That's exactly what Lincoln Riley wants to do. So if you have that many roster spots open, why not, call up a booster and be like, hey, we need another receiver. Go talk to this guy. He'd be a great fit for us because he's probably looking to get out anyways.
Yes, I think that's the logical step. They also, obviously there's been a lot of movements there. They were a team that last year brought in a few receivers in the portal as well. They had brought in a guy from Texas and a guy from Memphis. I don't think either of them played a lot, but we're only thinking, at this point that it started with Lincoln there, and all these guys are new and they're seeing a lot of roster turnover. They also saw that last year with Clay Helton's last year, which is, makes for a pretty transient roster, especially for a team at that level who wants to be competing for a P5 conference title. You don't see that much turnover, frequently. It's definitely uncommon.
And that was another thing that they were talking about too, that Lincoln came in saying was that he was expecting to turn over, I want to say he wanted to turn over 35 roster spots.
Yeah.
Like coming into the program, so that's why there's all these scholarships open with all these transfers. But I absolutely love what they're doing over there. And so the whole thing about Jordan Addison is, we just saw this happen basically with that Clemson receiver, Justin Ross.
Yes.
He was undrafted. He's not signed right after the draft, like a lot of these other guys were. It took him a couple of days to find a home. But he's settled into Kansas City. His medicals are bad. His testing was bad. So a lot of the tape kind of, I think, got overlooked because of the medicals and because of the testing. And so, I think he ran it was like a 4.7 40.
Very, very poor.
Yeah. So at that point they're like, okay, well, he's not explosive coming off this injury anymore. He's probably lost a step. That's why it's so important for guys like Jordan Addison in college football to go ahead and cash in on what is reportedly a historic deal. I'm seeing it's $3 million to go to USC.
Yeah, that's that's around the figure I've been hearing as well. Which of course, we don't know all the dollars and cents, but if you're hearing it reported multiple places, somebody probably knows something. So it's probably in the ballpark, yeah.
So you got to take
and
you have to
I agree.
as a college athlete, because you don't know what the future has.
No. And it makes sense that would be a place to do that as well, because you have a fan base who is really starved for success and wants to win. Now they don't want Lincoln to build. Lincoln wasn't brought in for the process to take place over time. He was brought in so it happens immediately. I mean, that's the fact of it. And you'd have to say, a few months into that job, where 5 or 6 months into him having that job,
something like that,
it looks like he's well on his way to doing that. He's checked almost all the boxes to see results right away.
He brought so many guys over from Oklahoma alone.
He did. Yeah.
Like, I know a lot of Oklahoma fans are still really upset about this, but doesn't that speak volumes to the person that he is and the coach that he is? If that many players are going to follow him.
Yeah. I mean, they've just in the last few months, they've brought guys in from Arizona State, Ohio State, Alabama,
Ohio State, Shane Lee, right? Oh no, that's Alabama.
Brian Shaw was one from Ohio State, a safety. Yeah. Eric Gentry was a backer from Arizona State, and then you brought in Travis Dye, the starting running back from Oregon, probably your biggest conference rival at this point, or one of the two biggest with Utah. You brought Romello Height, a linebacker from Auburn. Shane Lee was from Alabama. Austin Jones, again, the starting running back from Stanford, another of your conference rivals. And then a number of Oklahoma guys. Again, a starting defensive back from Colorado, another conference rival. That was Mekhi Blackman, good defensive back. Kansas State, Washington, you'd mentioned. So just in that, we mentioned guys that were starters or contributors at not just fringe G5 lower level teams, top level P5 teams that already have established names and brands that they're bringing in guys from. You don't do that unless there's something going on right. Now, is that thing that is right NIL money? Well, it's probably a part of it. I mean, we'd be foolish to say that it wasn't, but that doesn't answer all of it, I don't think. Part of it at least has to be the magnetism of Lincoln's personality and the proven results he's shown on the field. I mean, love him or hate him, you can talk about his results in the playoffs, which fair, I'm not going to debate that, but he's getting to the playoffs anyway, which is impressive. And the way he is as an offensive schemer is elite. He's one of the best in the country at it. If someone would tell me he's the best, I wouldn't fight you on it. He very well could be.
I mean, so look at the quarterbacks that he's put out just alone. Like there were two first overall picks.
Yeah.
And 3 of them ended up going in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. And Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams are pending.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're both going to be drafted. I don't think there's any doubt.
Certainly.
Like Rattler might not be as early. I think it's going to depend what he does this year at South Carolina. I don't expect him to stay more than a year at South Carolina. But
I think a lot of that will depend on success. Certainly, that's obviously in Columbia at USC, so kind of seeing the ground floor of that. And he's looked good so far. Spring has went well. Everybody is saying rave for how he's been.
Well, that's also the thing too, is South Carolina is loaded this year.
Yeah, they've done as I don't want to say they've done as well as anybody in the transfer portal, but after Ole Miss and maybe USC and Texas, they've done as well as anybody. And you could even argue after Ole Miss, they've been the second best. I will say in my mind, Ole Miss is clearly number one in how they've dealt with the transfer portal.
Yeah, because I'm still finding guys that they pulled this year.
Yes.
I just found one this morning. It was a running back out of SMU that I liked.
Ulysses Bentley. Yeah. Which I did a tweet about that a while, like right when it happened, because, that was somewhat surprising considering they had already brought in Zach Evans, who was one of the two best running backs in the portal. So it wasn't necessarily that they had a need. Now, Bentley is a different player. He's going to give them more of a receiving threat, but it's also not, you got a guy who was a clear starter at SMU, a pretty good school, going to a place where he is not going to be the every down back, but he still went there. That's speaks to Lane doing something right.
And I mean, Lane Kiffin likes having that two running backs that he can rotate. He just put two in the NFL, and Jerry and Ely and Snoop Connor, which I was surprised that Connor was drafted as high as he was. But lot of
people make. I was going to say there's a misconception around Lane. They use spread offenses a lot. He's had success with QBs everywhere he's been, but his teams have been the best when they're running the ball a lot more than they're throwing it.
Yeah.
It's, they're creating more mismatches when they're making those big running lanes and getting a lot more yards per carry.
That's a good, they did that this year. They not just with the running backs, but with Matt Corral, the quarterback too. Like he was running. Yeah. I remember against Tennessee, it was like every other play felt like he was just running the football as a designed quarterback run, and they were killing him. But
and it will be interesting if Jackson Dart does that, because he hasn't been known to run as much, though he's not slow by any means. I would expect Lane to be good enough to adapt to his personnel.
Oh, yeah.
And that running load won't be on Dart. It will be with the two running backs more. But again, I don't think it will limit what they do in any ways, because Lane will find other things to do more.
So before we really get into some of the guys that are actually in the portal, this was one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we talked about on the show. And it's that this whole outrage over Jordan Addison that we kind of touched on to start off with. It's very interesting because, first of all, a lot of the people that are complaining about Addison were all the same people that were clamoring and yelling and, hey, athletes need to get paid. And now they're getting paid and they're not staying at their favorite school. They're complaining about it. But they're also calling for, we need rules, right? We need rules to the transfer portal. We need rules to so the players can't just do this and blah, blah, blah. And so I guess my question is, and this is for anybody that kind of talks like this, I haven't been able to figure out any ideas, so I am genuinely open to them. But what kind of rules can we make?
So NIL-wise, I don't know that we can do a lot. And I think part of that would come down to legal reasons. Once you tell people they can get paid, as we've seen with the NIL, you can't really limit how much they can get paid, nor should you be able to. I don't think that's right. And we can't make specific laws that only target college football players.
That's essentially what was happening before. It was a law that just targeted 100%. College athletes.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I think that will happen eventually is we will see a window for the transfer portal. So I would guess you'll see it, either once the regular season or once bowl games are done, we'll see a window where guys can enter. Then during the spring, sometime after spring ball, when the semesters are ending, we might see another window. And then at some point in late July, early August, when fall camp has started and guys who are going and battling see that they're not going to be a starter, then you're transfer. That is an interesting window in itself because all the portal stuff is new, but that window in August when fall camp starts is not really new. FCS programs have been doing that for years. You get guys who are at FBS schools that lose their starting job. That's a great time for FCS teams to target guys that'll start right away for them. So some time frames and an open and closed window could be changes we see to the portal. Beyond that, I don't logically know what could be put in place that A, is fair, and that B, practically can work.
And that's what my issue is. The people complaining about it right now is there is no easy fix to this. There is no real good ideas that are like, this is gonna make everything better and it's gonna make everything even. Because I get that was the whole point, of that entire rule before these laws kind of opened up these athletes to start making money. And that was because they didn't want boosters and all kinds of other people getting money and building these super teams.
Yeah.
And
people wanted the transfer portal so that guys like Paul Tyson could leave Alabama, so that guys who were at your elite P5 schools could go and find starting jobs. They didn't want guys like Jameer Gibbs leaving Georgia Tech to go and make Alabama better. They didn't want Burton going to Alabama like that. They didn't want JT Daniels going to Georgia. But there's one person right away that said that is what would happen, that the better teams are going to get better because proven players at lesser schools are going to transfer to these elite programs. And that's Nick Saban. He immediately knew this was going to happen, and nobody listened to him. Or if they did, they didn't make changes on listening to it.
Well, that's the other thing too, is you can't put a restriction on the portal like that, right? Because if we opened up the portal, and so one of the actually, this is one of the suggestions that I got from a guy on Twitter yesterday. I think it's a British-based podcast posted this. I do want to pull this up because I do want to give them a shout out. I'm on the right account. Flag on the Play, and they're a British-based podcast.
Interesting. I've never heard of them. I will have to check them out.
Yeah, I think they're still kind of small, but they have a lot of really good, insights and stuff. But that's what he was one of these guys that kind of came in and was like, hey, we need to make rules to this NIL stuff because it's getting out of hand and blah blah blah. And so I asked him, I said, well, what rules? What rules would you make? And he had suggested the 1 year you have to sit a season entering the transfer portal. And that's fine and good and everything. But now here's the issue with that. And it's not going to work. And it's because what happened when we had this before? The NCAA made exceptions, right? Because there are cases
they made lots of them
required exceptions. And what happened right before they opened the portal and they opened up that window and you could just you had the one-time free transfer.
Yeah. Which I would like to add a caveat there.
Yeah.
Most NCAA sports have always had that one free transfer. Baseball, wrestling, most women's sports. It's only football and basketball that they made you sit for a year until recently.
And that was because of the money that was in those, that's brought in through those sports. Yeah. So the thing was, what happened when they started making these exceptions is you had all these high profile players immediately getting these big time lawyers and basically finding a loophole in there so that they would be forced to get an exception as well. And that's just going to happen again, except now you're going to have bigger schools paying for these high profile players to transfer to them. So they'll be like, hey, we'll get you here. We'll get an exception. Here's the lawyer that's going to get you that exception. And they're going to pay and we're going to pay for it. So the NIL has closed that window, I think, personally. And that's why it's so there's nothing you can really do other than, I like what you said. There's certain windows that you have to hit.
Yeah. And there's no fix that is going to be perfect.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. Nothing is going to fit everybody at this point. That's just the way it is. And I also think so many of these things that people want to change, the cat's out of the bag. We're not going to be able to crawl back a lot of these things that are happening now. So I don't think you try to take them away. You modify what changes you've allowed so far.
That's fair. So with that, we're going to take a quick little break. And when we come back, we're going to go into some of these players. You have a whole document here on players that you wanted to talk to that are in the portal and talk about, and then some quarterbacks that could potentially go. So when we come back, we're going to get into some of that stuff. Get your most complete and the best football news from footballsapient.com. Based in truth, wisdom on sports. Back onto the show is Mike Huesmann and I. Huesmann writes for me at Football Sapient. You can follow him on Twitter. It's a really, really good follow, by the way. He just hit 1,000 followers, actually.
I did. Yes, I was very happy about that.
At Huesmann CFB. That's HUESMANNF CFB. And it's definitely worth the follow. I definitely 100% recommend that you check out his stuff. He's all over this transfer portal stuff. He's anticipating people hitting the portal, plus all the great articles that he writes on Football Sapient. So you wanted to talk about some of these guys that are in the portal. I'll go ahead and let you pick where you want to start. We've kind of talked about Jordan Addison, who's on your list, like pretty extensively, I think, in that whole situation. So who is still in the portal right now?
So a lot of that varies by position. We are seeing, ample guys at some spots, but then it's like a position like running back, there's hardly anybody out there. That is a, P5 or top G5 starter at this point. We had one who exited the portal yesterday. Emery Jones, formerly of Florida, has committed to Arizona State, which makes sense. They lost Daniels to LSU. Is one of the examples. He left Alabama for Arizona State, but I would expect Emery Jones to get that job. But that's also a program in a lot of turmoil right now.
Yeah.
Herm has done a pretty good job, but the NCAA investigators are all over them. They had to get rid of a bunch of assistant coaches, and we are seeing a huge exodus of players in the transfer portal. You're not going to tell me that's all due to playing time. I think the writing's on the wall that something big is going to happen, and sanctions are probably on the way. If Herm is not the coach week one, I wouldn't be shocked. He probably will be. I don't think he's going to get fired that soon, but it wouldn't be one of those, whoa, oh my gosh moments if he does. I do think at the end of this, I do not think he is the coach come the new year. I think too much has happened. But getting Emory Jones was probably good for them. The other big cue we have in the portal at this time, big is a relative word compared with other guys that have been in there, but Jerry Bohannon left Baylor. Started the majority of the season for them last year, but lost the job this spring. And Dave Aranda made that announcement. So Bohannon left Baylor. He is a guy who I think there's a few schools he could end up. Mizzou wouldn't shock me. Mizzou's been that team who, along with West Virginia, they were pretty much mentioned for every QB that was in the portal. We knew it was a need that when they lost Basilak to Indiana, and then when West Virginia lost Jarrett Dagey to Western Kentucky before JT Daniels came in, Mizzou needed a QB. We knew that. Now, Cook played a little bit for them at the end of the season, but I don't think you'd want him being the only guy on your roster going into it right now. So Bohannon going to Mizzou makes a lot of sense. He also schematically fits a lot of the stuff they do. But other than Mizzou, he's from Arkansas. Some people said maybe for the Razorbacks. I don't think that happens.
No, they don't. They got a couple quarterbacks. They're good.
Yeah, they had Jefferson obviously returns, and then Malik Hornsby dabbled in the portal, then removed his name and is going back there. So Arkansas makes no sense to me. Memphis is not far from where he grew up. They return a QB that has 2 or 3 more years left too. So I don't think Memphis is a team that is going to be in the mix. So especially if Bohannon wants to go to a P5 school, Mizzou makes the most sense. Then we get to running backs. Position I said is light. We have Kamaro Edmonds, who has spent 1 year at North Carolina, where he didn't see the field, but was a high recruit from in-state there. He is now in the portal. It will be curious where he goes. Most of the schools he initially looked at, recruiting-wise, were in that geographic area, not too far. But we don't really know. He just entered the portal. There hasn't been a lot of news out for him. So we don't really know what he's going to do.
Yeah, he's a 4-star guy, is he not?
He was. Yes, he was. And he'll find a home somewhere, I have no doubt, but tough to say where that'll be. But he definitely is a guy to look at in a position where missing spring ball would probably hurt you less than most spots. That's almost always considered one of those easiest positions to transition into from place to place.
Going back to the quarterbacks really quick.
Yeah.
So Emory Jones started 12 games for Florida last year and was probably one of the biggest roller coaster rides in terms of consistency. It was up and down. Yes. He had a couple really good games. He played great against Alabama.
He
then played abhorrently at the end of the year. And this is a guy that this time last year, we're talking about as a top 5 NFL draft pick, which I never bought, never saw. But Arizona State, how different is he than Jaden Daniels?
So I think he's less accurate as a passer. But there are a few guys at that level I would say he's more accurate than. He just does not hit his target well. He's probably a better runner than Daniels. Not necessarily that he's faster. I don't know that that's the case. He takes hits pretty well, though. To Emery, he doesn't go down easy, nor does he fumble too frequently when he gets hit. So
all good things outside of the accuracy.
We're also going to see mostly a new offense there. The entire offensive staff at Arizona State was let go in, I don't want to say Herm's quest to save his own job, but maybe that is oftentimes one of the last steps before you yourself get fired, is firing a bunch of assistant coaches. Yeah. We are seeing Scott Frost has already undertaken that this offseason. But that's where I'm at Emory-wise. I think in terms of the P5 schools, that's a better fit than most. That's not to say.
Marcus Washington, I think, is the next guy on your list. out of Texas.
Yes, receiver from Texas.
And you've got like several schools he could end up at.
He will end up at a big school. Yes, I don't think there's any that a P5 school that is fairly competitive is where he will end up. He was a top recruit out of St. Louis who went to play for Sark, is now leaving Mizzou. Certainly, I know I mentioned them with Bohannon, but Mizzou is going to be likely. Very few coaches are using the NIL system as well as Eli Drinkwitz is. He brought in a fantastic recruiting class for them, and they've guaranteed every player on the team some NIL money. So Drinkwitz has done a great job of getting boosters on board in his process, and that St. Louis to Mizzou pipeline is, long existed. It's been there. That's also included Illinois on the list for Washington. The name is escaping me, but he went to one of the private Catholic schools in St. Louis, and they've sent multiple guys to Illinois. So Bielema will likely get involved with that. See if they could pull him there. I don't know if it happened. And Bielema's a pretty good recruiter himself too. He's a guy who, that jovial, he's another magnetic guy who, even though he didn't succeed at Arkansas, he's recruited pretty well wherever he's been. Nebraska could be another spot for Washington. We talked about Jordan Addison. Maybe Washington feels that he can be that type of guy in Mark Whipple's system, who left Pitt for Nebraska to be the offensive coordinator.
Right.
And despite the downtrodden manner they've been in Lincoln for a few years, it's still an appealing place for a lot of people. There's still a big program, not as big, but there's still a program with a rich history who supports their own quite well.
I'm glad that you brought that up about Nebraska, because they've done surprisingly well with some of the guys that they've landed, especially out of the portal. And not just this year, but last year as well. There's a couple guys that they picked up. There's a defensive tackle, Payne. I think that was his name. Give me a second. I can find it.
Is that in this year or last year?
This would have been last year.
And okay.
I spelled Nebraska wrong. That's why. Fedarius Payne. Oh,
yes. Yes. Okay.
Oops. they landed him last year. Yeah. He just left for Virginia Tech.
Yes.
But no, I remember Trey Palmer this year went over there from LSU, the slot receiver. O'Shawn Mathis out of TCU is a pretty good edge rusher.
It's they recently lost Casey Rogers to Oregon just within the last week or so, who was a pretty good D lineman for them.
And they pretty much pulled up his replacement right away. So
they did bring in Devin Drew from Texas Tech, another D lineman, who's a guy I think will be interesting to watch. One of the areas of the portal I find interested and look at a lot is your top FCS players who transfer to the FBS level and where they can contribute. They brought in Omar Brown, defensive back from Northern Iowa, I would compete, probably start at corner for them.
He's a DB?
Which should be he is, corner.
You said Brown?
And Palmer, you had mentioned. Yep, Brown. And of course, they lost Adrian Martinez to K-State in the portal, but they've brought in 2 QBs. So they brought in Casey Thompson from Texas and Chubba Purdy from Florida State, Brock's younger brother. So
Purdy was a 4-star guy too. I think Thompson was 4-star and Purdy was definitely 4-star.
Yes.
So I don't think they're worried about losing our Adrian Martinez. That's an interesting fit right there.
Not at all. Yes.
Adrian Martinez at Kansas State. Like that's just interesting to me.
Yeah, I think with his running skills and that portion of his game, it should be a decent fit. But the way they've play actioned and not throwing the ball shorter and intermediate for most of their throwing game, that doesn't really fit his profile. So I think you're right. There's a lot of questions to have there with him. So
yeah, sorry to detract from your list again, but you brought up Nebraska. The last spot that you've got for Marcus Washington is Arkansas.
Yes,
potential landing spot.
Yeah, the Arkansas's been pulling in a lot of transfers. Sam Pittman's done a very good job. They did bring in Jaden Hazelwood at receiver, but it's a position they could use more guys at. And there are few programs in the country where I think you would look at them now and say they're on the way up. They're on the rise as much as Arkansas is. There's a buzz going on there, and they went from being absolutely awful under Chad Morris to right now thinking we might be the second best team in the West. We have a chance to compete and go to a New Year's Day bowl game. I mean, the speed which that transformation happened was remarkable.
Yeah, it was like,
I don't know if
it was like a year. It was like his first year, like you saw that rise coming. They were so close in a lot of those games, and that was the COVID.
Yeah, and they only won, they didn't win many games that year, but even in those losses, exactly. I mean, even in those losses, people were saying they're on the way up. He's doing good things.
Like that Auburn game, there was the incomplete pass from Bo Nix, if you remember that one.
I do.
That probably wasn't an incomplete pass.
I know. Absolutely.
And so if they get that, they win that game. But because I don't think Bo Nix is going to drive down the field with 20-some seconds to go and lead Auburn to victory under Gus Malzahn.
No, you would not think so either. That and Bo Nix has historically been a guy I'm not as high on as a lot of people is. I think there's a lot to be desired.
No, there. that was the funniest thing I think about last year was the like this time last year, I think Jordan Palmer came out. That's that famous quarterbacks coach, ex football player himself. I actually, somewhere around here, I've got an autographed card of his, a rookie card from 2007, I think Notre Upper Deck.
Okay.
So, yeah, he was with it was either Washington or the New York. I think it was Washington. He was a rookie with. Anyways, yeah, it was last year. It was this time last year. He was saying Bo Nix is going to be the number 1 overall pick next year. Book it. And most of us looked at that and was like, "Excuse me, excuse me."
We also saw some of those saying Emery Jones will be drafted high, and look where he is now. We were talking about him transferring.
Yeah, going to Arizona State, which is not.
This is a tangent topic as well, but I found it comical a day or two ago when I saw someone also now is saying Anthony Richardson will potentially be a top 10 pick. Like, didn't we make the same mistake last year?
When we get off the air, I want to know who said that. I might have to go all defiant L's on them.
Yeah.
They're gonna make a defiant
and it
L.
Wasn't like just football. A random. It was one of the reputable outlets that put this out as like him being a potential, fairly high pick.
Yeah, see, it's like it's way too early to start talking about all this nonsense unless you're talking about someone like Jalen Carter at Georgia, Will Anderson Jr., Alabama, and maybe if you want to talk about a quarterback going really high, probably Bryce Young. And that's about it. That's about all we know.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I don't think there's certainly not the number of O-linemen that we had this year who we know will be high picks.
Yeah.
And
I would love to see Will Anderson go first overall, by the way, just while we're on this.
Yeah, I think thinking that far out for me is always tough, because when you're saying, who you want to go first, who you think should go first, the underlying question we don't know until the season's done is
who's going to be
does that team need a quarterback?
Yeah, no, and that's not at all what I was trying to get at, but yeah, I mean,
and for me, that's how I conceptualize it, though.
Right. For me, I'm talking strictly as a skill set, as a person, as the story that's behind him. I love it because Nick Saban, I said this on Twitter yesterday, Nick Saban has had some very talented people that have come through, especially defensive linemen, but he's never had anybody as good as Will Anderson. This guy I was put on his tape yesterday. I think I was watching him against Cincinnati, and he was just winning in every possible way. At 243 pounds, it's a 5-tech, 7-tech, 3-tech. And I'm sitting here going, if he was like another 50 pounds heavier, we'd be talking about him being Aaron Donald,
Yeah. I saw that post you made, and it made me think, is there anyone I would say going into their last year of college who we thought was that talented? And there's probably not. I think you were right about that. The guys that we knew, there's definitely guys we knew were really good. He's had some O-linemen who we knew were top level. Minka Fitzpatrick was one that came to mind. We knew he was really, really good going into his last year. And the same thing with Dante Hightower, who's played for a decade plus in the NFL now.
For the New Patriots.
But there aren't many guys that I think have that skill set and that ceiling that he has. And I think for me, that might be what tips the scales. As good as Fitzpatrick and Hightower have been, Anderson's ceiling is probably higher.
He is. If he puts on I think he's going to put on 15 pounds this year, and that'll put him up to about 260. And he is going to be a monster coming off the edge. I absolutely love that guy. All right, so sorry. You know me, it's very difficult not to talk about NFL draft stuff. So Larry Hodges is a guy you wanted to kind of talk about a little bit. Tell us about him.
Tight end is another position that is very weak in the portal right now. And Larry Hodges, sorry, I was still in our mode.
Dante Hightower,
But so Larry Hodges is from Miami, and originally he was a Tampa native who came in as a 4-star, high recruit. Doesn't every tight end that goes to Miami come in as a high recruit, though they really attract those guys. I think he's had 3 catches over 2 years. He hasn't played a ton, and his contributions have been, pretty minuscule. But the talent is there. The frame is there. He looks the part of a top-level tight end. If he wants to go back to Tampa, USF could be a landing spot. He also has some legal issues hanging over his head. And they may be resolved. I know I don't want to comment on an issue too in depth and say things that may not be true, but I do know the nature of it. He was pulled over in a car that wasn't his, and he did have a handgun, and there was something else. I'm not saying it was drugs or alcohol, but it was one of the two. I will say that. I just don't know which.
I can pull that up.
So there's some potential. Okay. Yeah.
Larry Hodges,
but he's the top tight end left in the portal. While you're looking up with him, I will also stay on the Miami track, because the best top-rated O-tackle in the portal is Kylian Herbert, also from Miami, who is one of those guys we may never see again, who I think he's going in his 6th year. So he took the free COVID year, he redshirted, he played his other seasons, and he still has time left as a grad transfer because of the waivers people got for COVID. The rumor is that he's going to go to Western Kentucky, but I don't think he's officially out of the portal yet. So that's probably where I would say he's leaning. And he has, 1 year left after the multiple played. But
yeah, so it appears that he was charged with, well, they were going to pull him over initially because the front windshield was covered by sunscreen material, and he attempted to this was April, my bad, 2021. This happened right before the spring game. Was arrested for carrying a concealed firearm and possession of 20 grams or less of marijuana.
Okay.
And yeah, definitely had plenty of it. He was smoking it, so he was under the influence.
Okay.
And yeah, and that appears to be what it was.
Okay.
Yeah, according to the South Florida Sun Sentinel.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah. So I hopefully he can get that behind him and make better decisions and find a place at at his next stop where he can be successful. Far be it for me to, say a young person is bad for one indiscretion. I think we all make mistakes at that age. That's a pretty extreme one. We don't all make mistakes that bad, but I hope he does not let that define him and can find a landing spot that can help him get to the next level if that is his goal. If it's not his goal, then I hope he gets a college degree somewhere. The next guy I want to talk about is, for me right now, probably the most interesting person in the portal for Jerry Bohannon, and that is Dane Shore, a person who a lot of people probably haven't heard of. But Dane Shore nominally still should be a high school senior. He was from Alpharetta, Georgia, and he played this past fall at IMG, then early enrolled at Bama in January for the spring semester, then recently went in the transfer portal after the spring game. So in what could have been the spring of his high school year, he early enrolled at Bama. We've now entered the portal. And that's not a case you see too frequently.
It almost seems planned, like, hey, I'm going to graduate early from high school and I'm going to go learn a thing or two from Saban, and then I'm going to jump in the portal.
Maybe I got to say, I don't know.
No, it's impossible to know unless you're really close to it. But
yeah,
I'm just saying, also, like, that sounds planned.
Yeah, it's also one of those without the transfer portal probably never would have happened too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, exactly.
he would. I'm under the assumption he's leaving because he thought his path to being a starter was going to take a lot longer. And before the transfer portal, at Alabama, the way they are now, this guy rides the bench for the next 3 or 4 years and then maybe plays in his 4th or 5th year there. But I get why he doesn't want to do that. And he is a guy who, looking at the list of places that, places, other schools that he was considering, I mean, it was a who's who of the best schools in the country. I mean, going to IMG certainly is not going to hurt. Every school there is going to be looking, but his other schools, right here we have Texas A&M offered, Georgia offered, Penn State offered, Michigan offered, Oregon, Miami, North Carolina, Ellis. I mean, it's a who's who of the schools that wanted him to go there, which if you're going to Alabama, other schools are going to want you. You don't see guys that they had one offer that was Alabama. No, if Bama offers you, you probably got offers from 35 schools because you're that good.
Yeah.
But it also leads me to believe his next step will probably be wherever he wants it to be. He'll get to pick, and I have no idea where it's going to be. Texas A&M and Auburn both could use a tackle right now. And the way recruiting has been going lately, if Jimbo wants a guy, I wouldn't count him out. He's pretty well versed in that area these days.
Well, Texas A&M is one of the richest schools in the country.
They are. Yeah.
There's a lot of resources you can pull to get anybody you want there.
Yeah, I think Miami's one to look at. If Mario, wants to get Shore, they're going to be an appealing school right now. Especially, I don't know the full details, but there was a story that came out this week about NIL deals that Miami's about to undertake. Apparently, they've gotten local businessmen, not Nevin Shapiro, who are going to be doing these NIL deals. And in a place like that, similar to what we see with USC, it's an appealing place. I mean, who's not going to want to go to, if all things are considered, if you know you're going to get money and you know the Canes are going to compete, who wouldn't want to go there? It's one of the most appealing places that you could think of. But that was Dane Shore, and I think he's a very interesting case of, a guy who could still be in high school, but he's not anymore. There was the other one, and this might be, pending our time, the last guy I'll talk about. I said, Shore was one of my top interesting guys. Isaiah Land is another different one. Another one. He is from Florida A&M, so he was at an FCS HBCU where he was the National FCS Defensive Player of the Year. It was either 19 or 21 sacks in 1 year. He was a guy who came into college, just a beanpole. He hadn't physically developed. He was undersized. Then he gets to Florida A&M under Willie Simmons, a head coach I want to give a shout out to, who is on the rise and will be at FBS school before too long if he wants it. One of the rising young stars of the coaching profession is Willie Simmons at FAMU. But Isaiah Land, we're hearing LSU could be a possibility, Georgia possibility, Texas. He went in the portal and within a week had offers from all these schools, which you don't see as frequently, even in the top guys that have been in the portal. Oftentimes, a lot of them know where they're going to end up, like a Jameer Gibbs, Burton case. I think Addison case, these guys know. But Land, I think, legitimately is weighing his options, as he should. Being the Buck Buchanan Award winner as the FCS Defensive Player of the Year, he will be a huge get for somebody at that edge position.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely a guy to keep an eye on. In fact, I'm going to add him to my list of guys to look at this year, because
I think that's wise. Yeah.
Another,
I'll quickly mention while you're adding him on. Devin Barrett was at Troy. A decently high recruit. I forget if he was a 3 or 4 star.
Wait, who now?
Devin Barrett is his name.
What position?
So he played corner there, but that's part of why he's interesting, because he was largely recruited as a running back. So we don't exactly know what position he wanted to play at his next spot. It's kind of like Lavasia Carroll, who left Georgia and came to South Carolina. So but we're hearing Auburn has interest in Barrett. They were mentioned. And if we're hearing a school of that nature is interested in the guy, you got to believe there's something to it. And they see something that will be interesting with Barrett if we see him at D-back or running back at his next stop. And again, he was at Troy this last fall.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely a guy to keep an eye on then.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, some of these guys, that's the thing. That's why I wanted to have you on, is because some of these guys that you are tracking, I am not. And I think that's a good thing to have. Is
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's one of those where even I'm not at all saying I'm, the top or one of the experts, but even the sites who I look to, the guys I would consider the experts, guys fall through the cracks because of the sheer volume number we're seeing in the portal. It just happens.
No, let's be honest, Hughes. You're one of the best. That's why That's why you're getting into this now. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's why you just hit 1,000 followers, and that's not nearly enough. We need to get you more than that. But go ahead to, I guess, to finish out, who out of all these schools this year that you've been tracking, who are you anticipating having the biggest year?
I mean, it's tough to go any further than if USC, if we're saying improvement from last year. So I was always a guy, I never really thought Clay Helton was the right fit at USC. I thought his extension he got was
absurd.
Silly. Yeah. But based on how they were last year to where I expect them this coming year, I think they're going to be one of the biggest, turnarounds. Some other teams, I think that, I don't want to be a homer and say South Carolina, but
I mean,
they've done a lot. There's a lot of good that's happened. I already mentioned Lane at Ole Miss. A lot of people have thrown shade at Brian Kelly since he's been at LSU, the Ma family, and the awful sound bites he had. The guy's one of the best coaches in America and has been for 20 years. He's going to do good things at LSU. Now, that's not only down to the transfer portal, but it's in part to the transfer portal. We also were really disappointed by Sark last year and how things went down in Texas. Mm-hmm. He will not be judged by his first year and some of those bad losses. He might be judged by how Quinn Ewers looks the next couple of years.
Yeah,
and
that's a good point.
I think it's going to be pretty good. Beyond the not playing at Ohio State and the Joe Exotic haircut, he's one of the most naturally talented high school I've ever seen before. I mean, he drops back and flicks his wrist like Uncle Rico, and the ball goes on a dime wherever he wants it. His arm talent is amazing. So I think Texas will get a lot better. They also brought, Ajay Hall, a receiver from Alabama.
Yeah,
Jaleel Billingsley, a tight end from Alabama, who, again, a couple years ago, we were thinking could end up being a high NFL draft pick who got in Nick's doghouse. Some of those things happen. But if you're a freshman tight end at Alabama and you're the team's primary kick returner, you have a unique skill set. And
extremely unique.
Yeah. And he also had his great year when Sark was the OC there. He knows how to get those matches, especially in those crossing patterns and to get guys open. Texas is going to be a fun team to watch. Now, I've never been a huge Longhorns fan, but I'm excited to watch him. And I'm not trying to throw shade at him, but year two under Stark, I think, would be a lot better. They also brought in Brennan Marion, one of the most innovative coaches in the country. He was Jordan Addison's receivers coach at Pitt. Before that, he was with Todd Graham at Hawaii, played for Todd Graham at Tulsa a few years back. But remember when Howard beat UNLV? It was, I think, the biggest FCS over FBS win a few years ago.
Yeah,
he was the old coordinator for Howard then, and he innovator of the go-go offense. So they'll do like the shotgun with the QB and then running back, so two running backs on the same side. But he's the receivers coach now there at Texas, and he won't be for long because he'll be an old coordinator somewhere soon. But Sark's doing a lot of good things, and I don't think we should read too much into some of those year one losses they had. Again, I'm not saying it was okay that they lost them, but again, I used the phrase before, don't let that define you. That year one's not going to define Sark's tenure in Texas. It will be in the next few years and how they, how Quinn Ewers develops and what happens there.
I'll give you a guy before we take off, and that nobody's really talking about right now, but Michigan State is loaded. I mean, they brought in a bunch of guys. They brought in Aaron Brule from Mississippi State.
Yes.
Reed from Western Michigan. at wide receiver. I mean, like there are some talents that are on this team right now, and that's just older guys. I've got some younger guys too.
No, they've Mel Tucker is the top coach. In fact, this is a topic for another day. But one of the eternal questions in college football is who will succeed Nick Saban at Alabama. Mel Tucker would be in my top 3 right now if I were going to make that list.
Yeah.
So sure. He's a former assistant of his. Before we get too deep into that, I would say that Mel Tucker, Mario Cristobal, Bill O'Brien would be my top 3 right now for that list to replace Nick. But who knows? Because we're a few years off from that, longer than I initially thought we would be. So yeah.
Mike Huesmann, ladies and gentlemen, you can follow him on Twitter at Huesmann CFB, and go ahead and give him a follow. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Yep. Thank you. See you later.